room and forget why you came? Is it just normal aging, or the first sign of something bigger? Every senior in America asks this question silently, but very few get the right answer. Today, we uncover the 7 early signs of memory loss that you must watch for before it's too late. Asterisk when we talk about the earliest warning sign of memory loss. One of the most common and heartbreaking experiences is forgetting recent events while older memories remain crystal clear, and for many families, this contrast feels both strange and painful because it creates a split reality where the past feels alive but the present slips away almost instantly. Imagine a grandmother who can close her eyes and describe in beautiful detail her wedding day from 1965, the color of her dress, the smell of the flowers, even the exact song that played during the first dance, yet when her grandson tells her about his school play just last night, she cannot recall it the next morning, and that gap between long-term and short-term memory becomes the first clue that something in the brain's delicate network is not functioning as it should. Doctors often call this short-term memory impairment, and while the phrase sounds clinical, the reality is deeply human, because behind every missed detail is a person struggling with confusion and frustration, and a family quietly wondering whether this is just normal aging or the beginning of something more serious. To understand why this happens, it helps to picture the brain as a vast library, with old memories stored in the deepest, most well-protected sections, while new memories are placed in a temporary area that requires daily upkeep. And as we age, the brain's ability to file away these new memories can weaken, meaning yesterday's events never make it onto the permanent shelves, even though the memories from decades ago remain untouched. Scientists explain this by pointing to the hippocampus, a small but powerful structure in the brain that acts like a memory gatekeeper, receiving new experiences and deciding where to store them. But in the early stages of memory decline, the hippocampus begins to falter, and new events either fade quickly or vanish completely before they can take root. Families often notice this sign first during casual conversations. A grandfather might repeat the same question 3 times in an afternoon, not because he is ignoring the answer, but because the information never anchored in his short-term memory. And while everyone else grows impatient, he feels trapped in a loop, unaware that he is asking again and again. These moments can create tension at family gatherings, where laughter and stories are meant to flow freely. Yet the senior is left nodding politely without remembering the details that were just shared. And for many caregivers, the realization strikes slowly, through repeated patterns rather than one dramatic event. In some cases, seniors themselves become aware of the problem, experiencing what doctors call tip-of-the-tongue moments, where they sense that a piece of information was recently told to them but cannot grasp it, and this can lead to embarrassment, withdrawal, and a loss of confidence, especially in social settings. One woman in Florida, a retired nurse named Ellen, described it as living with holes in her mind. She could recall the names of colleagues from 40 years ago but struggled to remember what her neighbor had told her just yesterday, and the fear of appearing forgetful made her avoid neighborhood gatherings she once enjoyed. Neuroscientists emphasize that occasional forgetfulness is a normal part of aging, just as wrinkles form on the skin. But when forgetfulness becomes consistent and begins interfering with daily life, it crosses into the territory of concern. And this is why experts urge families to pay attention not just to isolated incidents but to patterns over time. Research studies back this up. Harvard researchers have found that short-term memory decline is one of the earliest and most reliable predictors of more serious cognitive conditions, and when tracked early, interventions like mental exercises, dietary changes, or medical treatment can make a meaningful difference. But beyond the science, the emotional weight of forgetting recent events cannot be ignored, because it affects relationships in subtle but powerful ways. A grandson who shares his excitement about a school play may feel hurt when his grandmother forgets it the very next day, interpreting it as a lack of interest, when in reality, her brain simply failed to record the event. And this misunderstanding can create silent emotional distance within families unless they learn to separate love from memory capacity. In communities across the United States, support groups for families coping with memory loss often share similar stories. A father who remembers his military service in Vietnam as if it were yesterday, yet cannot remember whether he took his medication this morning. A mother who recalls lullabies she sang to her children but forgets the conversation she had with her daughter on the phone just hours earlier. And a grandfather who laughs heartily at a joke he told in the 1970s but cannot follow the plot of a television show he watched the night before. These contrasts are both beautiful and tragic, because they remind us that memory is not an all-or-nothing phenomenon but a fragile layering of time, with some layers remaining strong while others peel away far too quickly. In many cases, seniors themselves describe it as living in 2 worlds, one anchored firmly in the past, and one that slips through their fingers no matter how hard they try to hold on. Psychologists explain that this inability to retain recent events can also lead to increased anxiety, Because when the present feels unstable, the mind retreats to the safety of old memories. Which explains why many seniors with early memory decline prefer reminiscing about the past rather than engaging with new information. Families often misinterpret this preference as stubbornness or disinterest, when in truth, it is a coping mechanism, a way to stay connected to something familiar when the present feels like shifting sand. Yet, even in the face of this challenge, hope exists, because not every instance of short-term forgetfulness means a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's. Sometimes, it can be linked to stress, sleep deprivation, or even vitamin deficiencies, and doctors emphasize the importance of medical evaluation before drawing conclusions. Still, awareness is critical, because catching these early signs can mean the difference between years of independence and the rapid decline that comes from neglect. For seniors themselves, acknowledging the problem can be both frightening and liberating, frightening because it forces them to confront their vulnerability, but liberating because it opens the door to strategies that help them manage daily life. From keeping a memory journal to using reminder apps or simply building stronger routines. For families, the key is compassion, patience, and understanding that when a loved one forgets a recent event, it is not a reflection of their feelings but of their brain's current limitations. And by offering gentle reminders without frustration, they create a safe environment that preserves dignity even as memory falters. In the end, the story of forgetting recent events is not just a medical tale but a deeply human one, woven with love, fear, resilience, and the unshakable bonds between generations. And while the scientific explanation points to short-term memory impairment and hippocampal decline, the lived experience tells us that behind every forgotten school play, every repeated question, and every blank stare in a conversation, there is a person who still treasures the past, even if the present slips away. And recognizing this early sign with empathy is the first step toward protecting both memory and humanity. When you walk into a room and forget why you came, is it just normal aging, or the first sign of something bigger? Every senior in America asks this question silently, but very few get the right answer. Today, we uncover the 7 early signs of memory loss that you must watch for, before it's too late. It often starts with little things, a pair of glasses that someone insists they left on the nightstand but are instead found neatly tucked inside the refrigerator, or a set of house keys that mysteriously appear inside a shoe by the front door. For many seniors, misplacing items occasionally is just a normal slip of attention. After all, who hasn't lost their phone in the couch cushions or left the remote in the kitchen? But when it becomes a pattern, when objects are not only misplaced but consistently placed in strange, illogical spots, that's when families begin to notice something deeper may be happening. Imagine an elderly man named Harold who has always been meticulous, a retired accountant who once kept every receipt filed in labeled folders, his desk always in order, and his shelves alphabetized. His family first noticed changes when Harold began accusing others of stealing his wallet. He would grow angry and defensive, claiming his granddaughter must have taken it or that a neighbor had borrowed it without asking. Hours later, the wallet would be found inside the bread box, placed there absent-mindedly. At first, his children laughed it off, chalking it up to age or distraction. But soon the pattern repeated: remote controls in the freezer, mail stuffed into a toolbox, prescription bottles hidden inside the laundry basket. Each discovery left the family more puzzled and concerned, until finally, a doctor explained that this behavior, placing familiar items in unfamiliar, illogical places, is one of the hallmark signs of early memory loss. From a medical perspective, it's a symptom that arises when the brain begins to lose its ability to track not just what objects are but also where they belong, breaking down the everyday organizational systems people rely on unconsciously. For the person experiencing it, the frustration can be overwhelming. Imagine Harold searching desperately for his glasses, retracing his steps, his anxiety rising as he insists someone must have moved them, only to later find them inside the microwave. These moments chip away at his confidence, making him suspicious of those around him and leaving him feeling betrayed, even though the real culprit is his own faltering memory. Families too suffer, walking the fine line between patience and exhaustion, trying to soothe their loved one's anger while quietly worrying about what these signs might mean for the future. In one instance, Harold's daughter recalls preparing for a Sunday family dinner when she found the salt shaker, the pepper grinder, and the television remote all together inside the oven. A discovery that would have been comical if it weren't such a sobering reminder of her father's decline. Doctors warn that while occasional forgetfulness is harmless, misplacing items in odd places repeatedly is a significant red flag because it shows a breakdown in both memory and reasoning. The story of Harold is just one of many. Millions of seniors worldwide experience similar incidents, each one a small window into the struggles of a brain that no longer processes information as it once did. The takeaway is clear: when seniors begin to misplace items not just once in a while but often and in places that make no sense, it's not just forgetfulness. It's a call for awareness, for early medical evaluation, and for compassionate support from family members who may be the first to notice these unsettling changes. One of the most heartbreaking early warning signs of memory loss is when a senior begins to struggle with tasks that were once second nature to them, simple. Everyday routines that they've carried out for decades suddenly become overwhelming, confusing, or impossible. Imagine a grandmother named Eleanor, who spent 40 years baking the same apple pie every Sunday, her kitchen always filled with the comforting scent of cinnamon and warm pastry. Her recipe wasn't even written down, she knew every step by heart. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. At first, she would forget to add sugar or she'd put the pie in the oven without turning it on. Her children thought it was just an accident, the kind anyone could make. But then the mistakes multiplied. One afternoon, Eleanor put raw eggs into a salad instead of boiling them first. Another time, she placed detergent into the coffee maker instead of water. These weren't just slips. They were clear signs that her brain was losing its ability to process the sequence of steps required for familiar tasks. From a medical perspective, doctors explain that this difficulty arises from damage in the brain's executive functions, regions responsible for planning, sequencing, and carrying out actions. It isn't that Eleanor didn't know what an apple pie was. It's that her brain could no longer manage the chain of events needed to bring the pie from ingredients to table. The heartbreaking part is that the senior often feels a profound sense of shame and frustration. Imagine Eleanor standing in her kitchen, holding her head in her hands, embarrassed that the pie came out inedible, even though she couldn't understand why. She might snap at her daughter for interfering, insisting she knows what she's doing, while inside, she's terrified by her own confusion. Families often describe these moments as both alarming and deeply sad, watching someone so capable lose confidence in themselves. Everyday tasks like paying bills, writing a grocery list, or operating the television remote become monumental challenges. A retired teacher might no longer know how to balance a checkbook, even though she taught hundreds of students math. A veteran driver might suddenly forget how to start his own car. One story tells of a man named Robert, who had been a carpenter his whole life. He once built furniture so finely crafted that neighbors lined up to buy his handmade chairs. But one day, when he tried to fix a broken table leg, he stared blankly at the hammer and nails, unable to remember what to do next. The man who once taught apprentices how to build from scratch now found himself paralyzed by confusion over a simple repair. These struggles aren't just inconvenient. They signal something far more serious. Doctors call it functional decline, and it marks the point where memory issues spill into everyday life, robbing seniors of their independence. Families often respond by stepping in more, helping with meals, bills, driving, and household chores, but this creates a delicate balance. The senior may resist help, feeling insulted or infantilized, while the family feels trapped between wanting to protect their loved one and honoring their dignity. Imagine the arguments, the slammed doors, the moments of tears when an elderly parent insists they can still cook dinner, but the burnt pots and uncooked food on the stove tell another story. Beyond the home, these struggles can also become dangerous. A senior who forgets how to turn off the stove, lock the front door, or take prescribed medication correctly could face life-threatening risks. That is why doctors emphasize early recognition. When a loved one begins to struggle with familiar tasks, not just occasionally, but repeatedly and consistently, it's time to seek medical advice. The takeaway here is not just about spotting memory loss but about understanding the weight of these changes. Struggling with familiar tasks is not laziness, stubbornness, or carelessness, it is a visible sign that the brain is faltering. And for families, recognizing this early can make all the difference in ensuring safety, providing the right care, and approaching the situation with patience and compassion. For Eleanor, her family eventually realized that the apple pies she could no longer make weren't just recipes forgotten. They were early cries for help, a sign that her once sharp mind needed support. And for countless other families, noticing when seniors begin to falter with everyday routines may be the most important step toward protecting their loved ones and giving them the dignity and understanding they deserve as they face the challenges of memory decline. Perhaps one of the most frightening early signs of memory loss is when a senior begins to get lost in places they have known their entire lives. Imagine an elderly man named Harold, who had lived in the same neighborhood for over 50 years. He knew every street, every corner store, every tree-lined avenue, and every neighbor by name. For decades, he walked the same path each morning, out his front door, around the block, and back home, a routine as natural as breathing. But one autumn morning, Harold did not return on time. His wife grew anxious, and after an hour, she found him standing at the corner of a street only 2 blocks away, disoriented and frightened. He could not remember which way led home. At first, the family thought it was a momentary lapse, perhaps due to fatigue. But as weeks passed, the episodes multiplied. Harold would take the bus to the grocery store and forget how to get back, or he would drive to church and then wander the parking lot, unable to find his car. Doctors explain that this confusion stems from damage to the hippocampus, the brain region responsible for spatial memory and orientation. When this part of the brain deteriorates, familiar paths become strange, and the most ordinary trips feel like navigating a maze. For seniors, this is not just inconvenient, it is terrifying. Imagine being in your own town, surrounded by places you once knew intimately, yet suddenly feeling like you have been dropped into an alien city. The ground feels unstable, the air thick with panic. This experience leaves deep emotional scars, not just on the senior but on their entire family. Loved ones begin to fear letting their parent or grandparent go out alone. Car keys may be taken away, freedom restricted, all in the name of safety. But this restriction often leads to anger, resentment, and feelings of imprisonment for the senior, who insists, "I've lived here my whole life, I know my way around." And yet, reality proves otherwise. Families across America tell stories of police calls, frantic searches, and neighbors forming groups to look for an elderly loved one who wandered away. A woman named Margaret, for example, once got lost walking to her best friend's house 3 streets away. The same route she had taken hundreds of times suddenly seemed foreign, the houses all blending into one another. She knocked on the wrong door, in tears, asking for help. For her children, it was a wake-up call. Their independent, lively mother was slipping into a world where orientation could no longer be trusted. Struggling with familiar places is also one of the reasons why seniors with dementia often wander, sometimes walking for miles, unaware of how far they've gone, unable to find their way back. This not only exposes them to harsh weather, accidents, and crime but also fills families with constant dread. Every time the door creaks open, a son or daughter may worry, will mom come back safely, or will we have to file a missing persons report? The medical community warns that getting lost in familiar places is not a random occurrence, it is a clinical red flag. Unlike simply forgetting where you parked your car at the mall, this is about losing the map of your own life, the roads etched into memory by repetition and routine. When these internal maps fade, the world becomes a labyrinth. Imagine how disorienting that must feel, a senior standing at the end of their own driveway, unsure if the home they lived in for decades truly belongs to them. Storytelling deepens the understanding here. Think of George, a former mailman, who once prided himself on knowing every house in his city. He could deliver mail without looking at addresses because the routes were ingrained in him. Yet now, he can barely make it down his own street without forgetting where he is. This contrast, the man who once guided others now unable to guide himself, is a painful reminder of how devastating memory decline can be. For families, the takeaway is urgent. When a loved one begins getting lost in familiar places, it is no longer just about memory, it is about safety, independence, and dignity. Families must consider safeguards, GPS trackers, medical alert bracelets, and supervised outings. They must learn to balance protection with compassion, ensuring their loved one is never treated like a prisoner but is also never left vulnerable. Doctors emphasize patience, never scolding or ridiculing the senior, because for them, the fear is real. Instead, reassurance, gentle redirection, and structured routines become the tools that restore a sense of security. Getting lost in familiar places is not only a warning sign of memory loss but also a symbol of how the condition reshapes lives, turning once trusted environments into confusing landscapes, reshaping families into guardians, and reminding us all of the fragility of the human mind. To spot this sign early is to open the door for timely intervention, medical evaluation, and above all, a chance to preserve the safety and dignity of those we love. For Harold, Margaret, George, and countless seniors like them, the streets of their own lives became foreign lands. And for their families, the responsibility became clear, to walk beside them, to guide them, and to ensure they are never truly lost, even when memory fails to show them the way. Memory is the thread that stitches together the story of our lives, every laugh, every milestone, every face we love. But when those threads begin to fray, the warning signs often whisper before they scream. Forgetting recent events, struggling to find words, losing track of time, or even getting lost in familiar places, these are not just quirks of aging. They are signals our brain is sending, asking us to pay attention. For seniors, these early signs can feel frightening, like pieces of themselves slipping away. But for families, recognizing them early can make all the difference. The truth is, memory decline does not have to be faced alone. With awareness, medical support, lifestyle changes, and above all, compassion, seniors can still live lives filled with dignity, purpose, and connection. So if you notice these signs in yourself or someone you love, don't ignore them, take action. Because catching memory problems early could be the key to holding on to the moments that matter most.